So, Ken, you're talking about how all of these factors then play into a risk model, and Dennis, you're already talking about this idea of weighting, weighting these different attributes or factors. Is the approach, do you sort of start out with a third party and they're in the green zone, and then based on things that are discovered or actions or triggers, you sort of push them into the sort of the yellow zone or red zone? Is that the way that these risk models work?
Well, it's important to emphasize that the risk model is really the central nervous system of your third-party management program. That risk model doesn't just dictate what scope of due diligence. That risk model is often prescribing and impacting the terms and conditions within your agreements, due diligence, the type of training, the schedule for ongoing monitoring. So that risk model is very, very important.
So as you're taking into account all these factors, what is, I just sort of for somebody who hasn't done it before, one approach I guess you could take would be, well, you start out with a third party and you sort of optimistically assume they're a good third party. And based on behavior or attributes or factors or conduct, you sort of push them into maybe a red zone, kind of, I guess, horizontally push them into a red zone of some sort. Is that the typical way you go about this?
So when we look at assessing the risk of a third party, think of the life cycle of a third party being the onboarding process, the management of that third party, and then monitoring the third party. When you establish in that life cycle, initially that third party will get some type of a risk score. That risk score is created from a risk engine. The risk score is, well, first off, the expectation of a risk model is a vertical model. And that vertical model is, let's just call it for simplicity, high, medium, and low. When a third party goes through the risk engine, the various factors that are considered and weighted create a risk score. That risk score doesn't always say that that third party is low risk to begin with, because there's factors that will immediately calculate a score that puts them in a high risk or a high risk tier category. And so the risk model should have the ability, a credible risk model will calculate a risk score that from the very get-go of the evaluation or assessment process will pin that third party into a risk tier. The wrong thing to do is to assume that every third party starts off low and then based on assessment or input, then they're escalated to medium and high. A credible risk model will calculate a score based on risk factors, weighted risk factors that will prescribe a tier from the get-go.
And that's really driven by the company's potential culpability for FCPA violations. If you have reason to believe that a third party may engage in corrupt behavior and bribe a foreign official, then you're more likely to be held liable for that third party's actions. So you look at relationships that you have where you're very close to the third party, a joint venture relationship where you're sharing risks and rewards, you have some ability to control the joint venture, or maybe a lot of ability to control the joint venture, and the local party is conducting relationships with foreign officials. You look at agents who are given the power to bind the company, for example, in the Middle East. That would be a very high-risk third party. You might look at consultants who have ill-defined assignments, non-standard consultants. Consultants are a source of bribery, and so they would be a high risk. You might have lawyers and accountants that have interface with foreign officials in terms of the courts, in terms of negotiating tax issues and things like that. They may be medium risk or even high. So you go down and you examine the relationships and try and determine the closeness of the relationship, how likely you are to be culpable for and how much control you have over them. If you're a franchisor and you have franchisees that are selling to foreign governments, chances are you have a lot of control over that franchisee. And that's an area that some of our clients have looked at and placed them in the medium to high risk category.